Hey, Clemson family, it's time to preview this year's 2022 Tigers Seminoles game, get into an overview of the offensive line this season, and a little bit of news from the football team's all in cookout for football recruits.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We'll also break down our picks for the ACC and take a look at recent baseball commitments.
I'm Bill Zimmerman, and welcome to episode 9 of the Reign Supreme All Way podcast. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button. A lot of other folks are doing it. We appreciate everyone paying attention. We don't want you to miss out when we keep you caught up on all the happenings in Clemson sports and offer our analysis. You can find our homepage at clemsonkickoff.com. We're on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff, and we're on Facebook at Reign Supreme All Way. A lot of you are finding us on YouTube, and we really appreciate that. Let's quickly get into the latest additions to the Clemson baseball program, or pending additions at least, one of which had assistant Nick Schnabel posting on Twitter with a kind of celebratory message that's become the norm.
Yeah, it's great to see those posts from Nick on Twitter, and you start looking to see who and when, and you get excited about that. The most recent ones we saw, one in 2023 and one in 2025. We'll talk about that one in a minute, but let's focus on Jackson Cole. He's a left-handed pitcher from Boiling Springs. He committed to the Tigers on Monday. He's a really good player. Perfect Game Scout tweeted out that he is a legit three-pitch pitcher. So we'll see what Jackson can be. We'll follow him through his senior year of high school, and then we'll see what he can do when he gets to the Tigers.
New head coach Erik Bakich getting that roster stocked, getting those commitments. He's already got someone on board for 2025. That's really interesting.
Yeah, 2025, Logan Struck. Now, Bill, listen to these measurements on this young man. 6'5", 195. And if you look at the picture of him on TigerNet, he looks like he could grow into that 6'5". He is a really strongly built young man. He's rated as a top 10 prospect in the class for the state of South Carolina in 2025. So 2 big-time pickups for the Tigers and Coach Bakich. Hopefully we'll see those continue to come as we go through the rest of the summer.
Also, some recruiting news among football prospects. Some recruits were on campus today as we record this, Monday the 25th, for the All-In Cookout, which traditionally has been a major connection for the staff and recruits and has yielded a lot of good commitments. Almost everyone in attendance this time around is committed, but we had an offer go out, and there also was a priority target on campus today.
Robert Billings is that priority target. He's a 4-star safety from Alpharetta Milton High School. Really talented young guy. He's a player that Clemson's been after all summer, and I think he's going to be a really good addition if they're able to get him in the fold. There's been some talk on all the recruiting sites that he's kind of a Clemson lean. I haven't seen a commitment date for him yet, so we'll see when the news comes for Robert, but he would be a really good pickup for the secondary. The offer that came out today is Shelton Lewis. Shelton is a cornerback. He's from Stockbridge, another Metro Atlanta player and a really talented player as well. So busy time the last couple of days for the secondary for the Tigers.
Perhaps some more Peach State connections coming to the Clemson secondary. We've had A.J. Terrell there, obviously first-round pick, and then went right back to the Peach State, drafted by the Falcons. His younger brother is coming in. He's a commit. Both these guys from Georgia. Mike Reed has done well recruiting cornerbacks. And Mickey Kahn, of course, formerly a high school coach in North Georgia.
Yeah, Mickey knows that area. Coached in Metro Atlanta. He's done a really good job recruiting in that area. And you mentioned Coach Reed. I think Coach Reed is one of the underrated position coaches in the country. He's a terrific cornerbacks coach. He's continued to put cornerbacks in the NFL, and I don't see that stopping anytime soon if they're going to continue to recruit like this.
Well, it's going to take top recruits to be able to beat teams in the Atlantic Division the next several years. We're seeing some teams on the upswing. One team that would like to join that upswing is Florida State, and we're ready to preview the game this season against the Seminoles. A lot of what-ifs in Tallahassee this year. Quarterback Jordan Travis is back. If he can stay healthy, he certainly brings an electricity to that Florida State offense that Coach Mike Norvell needs.
He does. He's a dynamic player, and he's obviously the leading passer, 1,500 yards from last year. But, Bill, he's also their leading returning rusher with over 500 yards. So you wonder what he can be in another year in that system, what they can get done. And you and I kind of talked about this. They need to protect him. They have not done a good job protecting their quarterbacks the last almost full decade, at least half a decade, where Florida State has struggled with its offensive line. That happened again last year, and they got their quarterbacks beat up. So we'll see if they can continue to keep him upright, keep him healthy, and see what kind of player he can be, because I think he has talent. I really do. But we all know how it is. If you're a quarterback, you're only as good as that group up front, and they need to be a lot better for him to have a good year this year.
All three of the big three in the Sunshine State, Florida State, Miami, and Florida, have had struggles at the same time with the offensive line. And having grown up in Central Florida, I can't remember the last time it was this bad among all three at the same time. Well, Miami went out and got a former O-line coach in Mario Cristobal to address that. Mike Norvell at Florida State does have that background on the O-line, and he's had a couple of years to try to rework the blocking up front for the Noles. Hasn't really gained any traction. You wonder if this is going to be the year that they can protect the quarterbacks, open some running holes, and make that Seminoles offense get back to what it's known to be.
You would think so. Look, they've got 4 starters back. Left tackle Robert Scott Jr. is back. Dylan Gibbons, he was an honorable mention All-ACC last year. Maurice Smith is a sophomore. Darius Washington is a sophomore at right tackle. So they're young up front for the most part, with 3 of those guys being sophomores, and then Dylan Gibbons is a senior. So there is talent there. It's inexperience. You would hope, if you're a Florida State fan, that playing last year a lot, and Darius Washington played a lot, and all these guys played a lot. Washington started all 12 games. So you would hope that that experience from last year will help them going into this season.
On the ground, Trey Benson is a transfer running back from Oregon. He had 77 yards in the spring game. So you wonder if Benson maybe can be that 1-2 punch with Travis. Travis, a good rusher as well. Can that create the kind of dual threat that might keep a defense on its heels just enough to turn those no gains into 2 or 3 yards and try to keep the offense on count during drives?
You would hope so. If you're cheering for this team and you don't want the quarterback to be running for 500, 600 yards, unless that's just happens naturally. It felt like that happened for Florida State kind of out of necessity, because the quarterbacks were running for their lives a little bit. You know, Benson's a really good player. I think he can bring something to this team. And again, that the running game as well starts with the group up front. If that group up front is much improved, I think there'll be some holes for Benson to run through.
Not a lot of people in orange, myself included, rooting for Florida State. That's for sure. It's been quite a rivalry down here. Yeah. Living down here when they were firmly entrenched atop the ACC, it was not a good experience for me. So it'd be nice. Both my neighbors are Miami fans, and we all agree it'd be nice to kind of help keep them down and keep them out. Some newcomers on defense as well. Even though 5 regular starters are coming back, we're going to see some new faces trying to stop opposing offenses. And that Florida State defense that we used to fear quite a bit has definitely had cracks in recent years.
It has. And Clemson fans remember when Florida State was at its best, that defensive front was a handful, and it was a problem. This group has not been that in recent years. A lot like the offensive line. They've really struggled on the defensive line, but they've got some talented players coming back. Derek McClendon is a sophomore at defensive end. Leonard Warner is a 6-year senior. And then redshirt freshman Patrick Payton is somebody to keep an eye on. And then there's a new face to watch out for this season in Albany transfer Jared Verse. I know at The Athletic, he was one of our top transfers to watch throughout the season. Max Olson wrote a lot about him for us. He was an FCS All-American and is a talented player. So we'll see what he can bring to that defensive line as it continues to try to progress under this coaching staff.
I want to give a quick shout out to Matt Murschel of the Orlando Sentinel, former colleague of mine. When he and I have worked in the newsroom together, had a lot of really good info on orlandosentinel.com, helped me prepare for this episode. I know you've dealt with Matt on your radio show as well.
Matt does a great job, and he's always on our show here in Macon. He's a great guest for us, knows his stuff. And if you want to read about these teams in the state of Florida, Matt is certainly the one to go to.
Another place I got some show prep was from one of the CBS Sports podcasts with Danny Cannell among the regulars. He, of course, is a former Florida State quarterback. He did not exactly have a lot of confidence that they could get past their over-under of 7 wins. And if he is saying that, reason to believe that Clemson should be favored in this game this year.
I think Florida State has taken some steps forward under Mike Norvell. I do, but I don't think this team is ready to compete with Clemson yet in the Atlantic Division. I would still rank them fourth in the division going into the season. And when would you have ever thought you would have said that, Bill, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when these two teams were fighting for the top spot in the division and the conference? But here Florida State is, and I would not rank them above NC State. I would not rank them above Wake Forest. So it looks like right now, middle of the pack in the division for the Seminoles.
I forget exactly what year it was where Ben Boulware had the big stop on 4th down in Death Valley to sort of swing the momentum toward the Tigers' favor late in that game. And then Wayne Gallman had the breakaway touchdown a few plays later to go up 2 scores and really put the game on ice. Super dramatic game. And then the next year, again, it came down to the wire with Jordan Leggett with that catch and then propping himself up on one hand. What a famous highlight that is for him to get the ball just barely across the plane, the goal line, whole body in the air with one hand in bounds and one hand on the ball, getting it past the pylon. It's been that recent. It's been at the start of Clemson's playoff run that this was just a hard-nosed, dramatic kind of game. My wife has looked at me during some of these and said, your whole body is gray right now. Like, they're that big of a game that recently. And it just not has been that way lately. So I think you're right. I think Norvell is moving Florida State in the right direction. I think Clemson's got to be fully prepared for this game, take it very seriously, be ready to handle quite a battle this year. But you have to think that Clemson's going to be favored in this one.
I would think so. And it does feel like Florida State is probably still a year or two away. If the university will be patient and give Coach Norvell time, Florida State could get back to competing for the division. And look, we talk all the time about the ACC lacking behind other conferences in football. Well, why is that? Well, it's not because of Clemson. It's because Florida State and Miami and Virginia Tech and North Carolina haven't really lived up to their end of the bargain. So it would be nice to see. Yeah, it's great to put 50 on Florida State if you're a Clemson fan, but it's also great to be in those games where you just don't know going in who's going to win. And it's a great environment. And then you go and beat that team, then it's even better for you when you can win those kinds of games. So we'll see when Florida State can get back to that point. It just doesn't feel like this is the year for that.
October 15th in Tallahassee. It'll be week 7 on the schedule. Don't forget, you can turn to us at clemsonkickoff.com. We've got a schedule posted there. We post all our episodes there. You mentioned the offensive line at FSU. It's time for us in our preseason overviews going through positions to look at the Clemson offensive line. And I alluded to this when we were talking about the tight ends in the previous episode. Clemson offensive line has struggled each of the last 2 seasons. 2 years ago, they had some erasers, as Dabo Sweeney likes to call them, in Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne. Last year, not so much. And I truly believe that while the offensive line was not solely to blame, it's the one thing that if it gets better, everything else can improve. It can't heal. You're not completely getting rid of that illness that you have. You call in sick to the boss and he checks in at the end of the day. Hey, you think you'll be in tomorrow? And what do you say? Well, I'm feeling improved. I'm not 100% better, but I'm improved. And the offensive line has to at least do that, get improved in order to help this entire attack take a big step forward this year.
It does. And last year was tough. I don't think even the most ardent Clemson offensive line defender would say it was a good year, because it wasn't. And things were difficult. And it's funny because there were times where they ran the ball really, really well. And that starts with the offensive line. So you can't complain about the offensive line in that way when the running game is working. But the pass protection just was lacking. And it probably was lacking the year before, like you talked about. But having Trevor and Travis to dump a screen off to and letting Travis go 60 for a touchdown really can change those things and maybe make things look a little bit better than they were. And then Travis didn't need a whole lot of room to get through a hole to break one as well on the ground. So this group has to improve. It has to. There's no way that Clemson gets back to the playoff or has the kind of year that we think it can have unless this offensive line improves.
That was, to me, the biggest difference. The 2015 season title game, January 2016, out in Phoenix, went out to that one and really wasn't sure what to expect stacking up against Alabama. But the O-line especially, you figured the D-line was stout enough that any offensive line, was going to match up well with the Clemson defensive line, and the Clemson defensive line was very effective. To me, the question mark was that Clemson offensive line holding off Bama's front seven, and they acquitted themselves. They did a very good job. And when I looked around, even though Bama came up with the win through some busts covering the tight end and a couple of busts on special teams, when I looked around as we were leaving and the Clemson fans were leaving and the Bama fans were staying behind, nobody was hanging their head down. And I certainly was thinking about the fact that both sides of the ball in the trenches, Clemson matched up with Alabama, and I very quickly began to think Clemson's going to be back next year. That's what's got to happen with this O-line. And certainly the talent, you can envision this talent doing well. Jordan McFadden, heck of a left tackle, grades out really well. Nobody's perfect at left tackle, but he grades out really, really well. Also on the opposite side, you've got Walker Parks at right tackle. He's done well. He's earned a lot of praise. Then you get to the middle, and that's where things get a little murkier. You've got Will Putnam converting from guard to center, a move that did not go well last year for Matt Bockhorst, but early reviews have this going much more favorably toward Putnam. They also have some decent backups available with Ryan Linthicum and Trent Howard. Perhaps you're going to see Marcus Tate start at one guard. He got a lot of experience last year. He showed his inexperience last year, but hopefully with spring ball and an off season to sort of apply what he's learned and realize how to fix things, he's able to do that in the off season more easily than midstream during the year. Hearing a lot of praise for Bryn Tucker, hearing a lot of hope for Dietrich Pennington. They've got the horses up front. They've got some corn-fed guys who are good on their feet. We'll see what Thomas Austin can do with them. We'll see how much the quote-unquote Clemson offense is going to change with Austin now coaching the line, with Brandon Streeter now calling the shots as a coordinator. That was a lot, but where is the biggest reason for hope in all of this, Daniel?
I think the biggest reason for hope is if Will Putnam can nail down the center spot. That was such a problem last year. The two guard spots were a problem. So if Putnam can get that job done, that really changes things. Like you said, you're solid on the outsides. I don't think the outsides were the problem last year either, but it was those three center spots. Well, if you look at it, if it's Putnam and Tate and Pennington and Mitchell Mays and Linthicum, Brian Tucker and the freshman, Colin Sadler, and then a couple of more sophomores and Trent Howard and John Williams, at some point you think of those nine, somebody's going to have to be able to get the job done. And you feel like you have enough talent there to make this offensive line be solid. Bill, I don't think this offensive line has to be great. It would be awesome if it was, but I don't know that Clemson's ever been great on its offensive line. It's been really, really good several times. But let's just start with solid. Let's start with no busts. Let's start with no penalties and just do the basics and do the job that way. And you would think of those nine who were in that group in the middle that there has to be three who can get that done.
They did in the midseason last year. I do want to give some credit, settle on a nice combination of Hunter Rayburn at center, Bockhorst at one guard, and I believe Will Putnam was primarily the other guard. And then Mason Trotter was kind of mix and match among those three positions. I'm not even sure they were healthy for a full week with that combination before they had to start, moving pieces around. So there were some injury issues there. But I do think the larger problem there was inexperience, some trouble with the scheme, maybe some trouble that you really couldn't run Uiagalelei a lot, and defensive tackles and defensive ends were able to kind of tee off, pursue the running back if it became clear it was going to be a running play, get after Uiagalelei if it was clear it was going to be a pass play. The O-line didn't have a full deck of complements at the skill positions around them. But again, it works from the inside out. You've heard over and over that you have to build a championship team from the inside out. Took Andy Reid a long time to learn that in Philly. He tried to do it from the outside in. He couldn't quite get across the finish line. Now in Kansas City, he seems to have figured it out. Clemson seems to understand that this O-line does have to get better. The blocking has to get better. You have to be able to run your full offense, and it only happens with time and space to run the plays you want to play.
It does. And how many times did we see, and I know DJ struggled at times last year, a lot, but how many times did he drop back, and as soon as his back foot hits the ground, he's got people in his face? So, I know that started in the Georgia game, and that defense is one of the best defenses we've ever seen, but that happened in almost every game. So that can't continue. Will Putnam is pivotal to this team's success. If he can be solid at center, and I know that it didn't work last year with Bockhorst, but it almost felt like Putnam's had more time to settle in at center, and he's not just thrown in there. He went through the entire spring at center. So we'll see if that can help. I think Dietrich Pennington is huge. How many times did we hear Dabo Swinney talk about that Pennington probably could have earned a starting spot last year? So,
right.
And then all these other guys have a little bit more experience. So I do think the offensive line will be better. You and I, believe me, we've talked about it. I don't know how it could be much worse than it was at times last year. And then, Bill, it's also weird because there were games where they ran the ball really well, but then the pass protection was not good ever the entire season. So,
right.
Or at least not up to the level that it needs to be for you to be a championship team. So I do believe the offensive line will be improved. How much that is and how big of an impact is, we just have to wait and see when they start playing the games.
One last question. You have 3 games early in the year where you shouldn't have to really take situations very seriously. Knock on wood. Let's hope that's right. With Georgia Tech, with Furman, and with Louisiana Tech. How do Brandon Streeter and Thomas Austin kind of juggle that desire to get a lot of guys snaps and get some evaluations out there against, hey, who are the 3 guys that we need to keep together and have them work in unison to make sure that they're going to be able to propel this offense?
I would make sure that I have my 5. Whoever that 5 is, there's been some talk maybe that Walker Parks moves inside if Blake Miller is as good as he is. And a lot of people are talking about Blake Miller. They talked about him in ACC Media Days. Jordan McFadden talked about him. DJ talked about him. If Blake Miller is as good as he is and he's one of your best 5, then he's got to be on the field. I don't care if he's a true freshman. So whoever that 5 is, those first 3-4 games, I think you've got to get them as many reps as possible, Bill, because they haven't played together. And we know how being a cohesive unit, how important that is for an offensive line. So figure out who those first 5 are, get them as many reps as possible. But then you're right, also sprinkle in these other guys to make sure they have, as Dabo likes to say, functioning depth. And if they have that, that will be a big step forward as well.
Reminder, you can follow us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff. You can subscribe to us on YouTube or Google Podcasts. It's free podcast. We want to keep it that way. You can also follow us on all the major podcast services. You talk about offensive line. I think it's going to be the most critical element to what we're going to talk about next. And you and I are both going to make a few quick predictions about the order of finish in the ACC, especially who's going to come out on top in each division and who can prevail in the title game. Offensive line has to get it done. Offense overall has to improve to a man, all 11 positions, if Clemson is going to be one of the teams come out on top. And I will say that I think they will come out on top in the Atlantic, but it's not as easy a pick to make as it used to be, is it?
It's not. NC State's really good, and NC State beat Clemson last year. But NC State, I don't know who MC State is. MC Hammer? NC State has to come to Clemson this year. So you would think that should help Clemson. And maybe there's a little bit of revenge factor there for the Tigers. But, Bill, Clemson had a championship defense last year, and the offense held this team back, and it started with the problems on the offensive line. So I'm with you. It's 100%. The offensive line has to be better if this team is going to be a championship team. But I do think the offensive line will be good enough that this team will get it done. And does that mean that the defense is going to play great and the offense just has to do enough? Okay, so be it. I'm all for that. But I do think that's going to be the case, and I think the Tigers get it done in the Atlantic Division.
I also want to throw Wake Forest into that mix. I totally agree with you. NC State is the primary challenger to Clemson and probably pretty close to on a par with Clemson, having beaten Clemson last year, just maybe not quite the same level of athletic talent coming back. But it was Wake Forest who won the division last year, don't forget. And that could really make it, once again, a 3-team race right down to the final week of the year, just like it was last season.
It's going to be fun. I do believe the division is better this year than it's been in a long time. I think Florida State's improved, but I think Florida State is the 4th best team. I think Louisville's improved, and it's right there with Florida State. But those top 3 have separated. And they might be the three best teams in the conference. I think you could make a case that Clemson and NC State definitely are the two best teams in the conference, and then Wake Forest is up there as well. So I think we're in agreement there. We might disagree on the Coastal because I am hearing so much talk about Miami. Miami is getting so much hype, and everybody's talking about Miami that I almost find it hard to believe that Miami can live up to that in Mario Cristobal's first year. So I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit here, Bill. I'm going to pick North Carolina. I know that Sam Howell's gone, and I know that North Carolina didn't live up to the hype last year. The Tar Heels can figure out who their quarterback is, and that person can just be solid. I think North Carolina's got everything else you need around that person to have a really good team.
It was interesting. I read something during ACC Media Days that Mac Brown kind of heard all the hype last year and kind of thought to himself, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we're where people expect us to be. He does sound more confident this year. And if he's willing to share that story, that sort of builds the case for him to have that confidence. It could be interesting. And a lot of people are picking Pitt even after the departure of Kenny Pickett. I'm less sold on Pitt than I am on North Carolina. I am going to pick Miami, and not because of my proximity, having grown up down here in the Sunshine State, not because I'm afraid of those neighbors I mentioned earlier, but because there's so much talent on that roster, right? Like, I was shocked the year that Clemson blew out Al Golden. I was fairly surprised the magnitude of victory in the ACC championship game when Mark Richt was Miami's coach. The talent is all there, and I think what they have now in Mario Cristobal might be that guy who takes them out of sort of that Tom Landry level-headed, hey, let's not get too high, let's try not to get too low figure in Manny Diaz. That was sort of the countenance he tried to adopt as a head coach, it seemed to me. Cristobal is going to be a little more himself, I think. He's got a little more experience as a head coach. He's got South Florida ties. He's from the U, went to school there, has brought in a lot of key guys. When you've got Ed Reed and Jason Taylor, a couple of NFL Hall of Fame caliber players, just on your sideline as analysts, and those guys are still young enough for active players to realize who they are and how significant they are, especially when they're recruiting South Florida as intently as they are. I think there's going to be a lot of energy there. If he can bring the structure that they need, and he had the opportunity to learn that under Nick Saban, if the O-line gets sorted out, and that's rarely a quick fix, and that could be the real Achilles heel for the Hurricanes this year, but they've got their quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke. They've got their new head coach. He's trying to make sure that he channels that energy in the right places. He might just step right up and lead them to a division title.
Look, he very well could. And I think they have the right guy. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He is a terrific coach. They've got everybody pulling in the same direction. We hear the cliches all the time. Everybody's got to pull the rope in the same direction. Everybody's got to row the boat in the same direction. All those cliches, they're doing that now. And they haven't done that at Miami in a long time. So if you said, Daniel, who's the most dangerous team in the ACC for Clemson fans to think about for the next 5 years, it's definitely Miami. There's no doubt. There's no question. I just think they're a little bit too early this year to be getting as much hype as they're getting going into the season.
What do you think happens then if it's Clemson and North Carolina? We'll go with your pick for the ACC title, playing in Charlotte, almost halfway between the two campuses. Let's say it's a neutral site game. How do you have that ending?
I think Clemson is back on top. I going into this season really feeling like Clemson is going to be the ACC champion again. This group learned something last year. I think it might have humbled some players. I hope it humbled some of the fans. We've seen a lot of the fans got a little bit too over their skis about this program and thinking they can never lose. And they came back to earth a little bit last year. And as I'm sitting here doing air quotes about the down season, this team won 10 games, and it has the longest winning streak in Power 5 with a 6-game winning streak going into the season. So it's not like Clemson fell off the face of the earth the way a lot of people want it to. This team is going to bounce right back and win this division and win the conference and then go back into the playoffs.
I do think whoever comes out of the Coastal, whether it's Pitt, whether it's North Carolina, whether it's Miami, to me, North Carolina and Miami are the two most talented teams in the Coastal. but they just don't have that big game experience. And as much as Clemson may have had a, small print down season last year, they did still win 10 games. This roster, this group of guys knew how to keep the fight alive, knew how to make sure, even if they couldn't right the whole ship, they could finish the season strong. And they did. And sometimes you get a team like those early 90s Braves where they're just really good and brain dead and they go right through, and North Carolina could do that and Miami could do that, and maybe Pitt with a restocked roster would find a way to do that. But you have to consider Clemson the favorite again. Again, it's hard to be as confident saying that whether or not you went to Clemson, whether or not you root for Clemson. There are more chinks in the armor for the Tigers right now, but it's still hard to pick someone else and point at them and say that's the one that's going to get it done. And you're probably right. As loaded with talent as North Carolina or Miami might be, NC State's probably the second best team in the conference, and it sure would have been nice, although maybe in a practical sense, not so much for two Atlantic Division teams, had they scrapped divisions, kept the schedules the way they were, and the conference may find that it sort of regrets not being able to put the two best teams into the championship game at the end of the season.
Right. That's coming. I wish they could have done it this year, but I do think there's more of a chance that NC State wins the division than Clemson doesn't win the conference. If that makes any sense whatsoever. If Clemson wins the division, I mean, I do think NC State's more of a challenge than Miami or North Carolina this year. Again, Miami is going to be a problem, and Mario Cristobal and that crew and that staff, he put together an outstanding staff. And they're recruiting like bonkers. But that's for next year and a couple of years down the line. I just don't think this year they have everything it takes to make that big of a leap in 1 year. So we'll see as we go through the season. And Clemson plays them at home in November, which will be an exciting environment, I'm sure, at Death Valley.
Going to be a real litmus test for the Hurricanes, I think, and for the Tigers as well, to see, hey, how really is Clemson holding up, trying to bounce back from that down season. You mentioned the air quotes again of 10-3. So late season is going to be really interesting in the ACC, I think. One more piece of news that might be potentially big before we sign off here comes from the basketball team. Fill us in on that real quick.
Matt Conley did a great job updating everything about PJ Hall and his surgery. He had the surgery on Thursday, and then Thursday afternoon, Matt posted on his website at Clemson Sports that PJ was going to start rehab Monday, which would have been today, which is a great sign because the quicker you can start rehab, the quicker, if everything goes well, you can get back on the court. So it sounds like everything went really well with the surgery and that PJ could be back with the team, sometime early in the season, hopefully by mid-November. And obviously all of that is contingent on how the rehab goes well. We know everybody's body is different during rehab, but at least there was some positive signs about the surgery.
You did mention that he needs to be out there early on. Several key transfers coming in, I believe a key freshman or two as well. The roster is going to have a lot of opportunity for guys to find new roles, and they're going to need time to work together, just like we talked about the offensive line on the football team. They're going to have to sync up, get some experience together in order for Coach Brad Brownell to know who his starting five is and who he wants on the court working together, running the offense, running the defense.
There's talent there. I don't think there's any doubt. And I believe this is the best signing class that Brad has brought into this program with these four freshmen. I'm really excited to see what they are. But everything about this team feels like it spins off PJ. And if PJ's out there and he's healthy, this could be a really good team.
Also don't want to rush him back. There was some talk last year, maybe he came back a little too quickly. So hopefully things go well for him. Well, next time, Clemson fans, we will get into an overview of the 2022 running backs. A lot of success expected there among the Tigers. We also will preview the Syracuse game. And if any news breaks in the next few days, just like we did in this episode, we'll react to that as well and discuss what it means for Clemson athletics. I hope everyone has enjoyed this, and we are glad you found us, Clemson family. Go ahead and smash that subscribe button, hit that follow button. We're a free podcast. We just don't want you to miss out anytime we post. And if you can give us a like or a rating while you're at it, we'd appreciate that too. Our homepage has some great resources. That's at clemsonkickoff.com. You'll find all our important links there. You can also follow us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff. We'll retweet the news as it's happening. We'll give some quick hit opinions in real time there between episodes. And we're on Facebook at Reign Supreme All Way. I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.